Many thousands of moons ago, long before the rivers ran and the stars shined, there was nothing save a few divine beings, the kami. Before the age of men, who will come with their wars and cattle and thrones and emperors, was the kami-o, the age of the gods. Out of chaos, the earth and the heavens had been separated. Sent to earth by the primordial gods were two kami, known as Izanagi no Mikoto and Izanami no Mikoto. With their spear, they would land from below the sea's surface. The islands of Honshu, Kyushu, Hokkaido, Okinawa, and thousands of smaller isles rose from the depth, creating the archipelago that would become known many thousand summers and winters later as Nihon Retto, the islands of Japan. Pleased with their creation, the pair decided that they must populate the beautiful new lands. The couple had a number of children, who became gods and spirits of the sea, the mountains, grass, wind, and food. The kami were happy and expecting another child, but the child that Izanami was pregnant with was no ordinary child. She was pregnant with the god of fire, Kagutsuchi. Izanagi worried about his wife's well-being, and when she went into labor, those worries only intensified. Izanami was burned so badly when giving birth to her fire god child. She died. In his anger, Izanagi sliced the fire god into thousands of tiny pieces with his spear. The piece of the fire god fell to the earth, and where they settled, boiling volcanoes spouted red lava. Izanami's spirit fled to the underworld of Yomi. Her grief-stricken husband Izanagi chased her there to rescue, only to find her wasted away, her mind rotten. Distraught and disgusted, he fled back to the upper world, rolling a giant stone to block the gateway to and from Yomi. He would never see his beloved again. Izanagi waded into the ocean, where bathed to purify himself from contact with the dead. As he bathed, a number of deities came into being. From his left eye, the sun kami Amaterasu. From his right eye, moon kami Tsukiyomi. From his nose, the storm kami Susanoo. And of them, Amaterasu was the most splendid. These divine children would have children of their own and send them to live on the earth that their parents had so lovingly created, while they presided over their heavenly realms. Amaterasu, the sun kami, sent her own grandson, Minigi no Mikoto, to the newly formed islands of Japan to rule the world of the mortals. She intended for him to marry and have children and grandchildren of his own. And in 711 BC, a grandson was born to Ninigi. He would become the first emperor of Japan. With his accession to the Chrysanthemum throne, the age of the gods, Kamiyo, Jindai, would come to an end, ushering in the age of man, Hitoyo. The kami Yatagarasu sends a three-legged crow to the young Jimmu to serve him as a guide to the region that would become Yamato. The year is 660 BCE, and following Jimmu's conquest for Yamato and establishment of this as his center of power, the Yamato dynasty begins. Jimmu Tenno is said to have ruled for over 100 years. Emperor Jimmu died and was succeeded by his son Suizei. Emperor Suizei is the first of 8 emperors about whom we know nothing about. All we know about these missing emperors, scarcely mentioned in the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, are their names, place of birth, names of wives and children, location of their tombs, and the dates of their reign. Though these missing emperors appear in the Japanese chronicles, the sagas give them inhumanly long reigns and lives of over hundreds of years, and archaeological evidence is yet to verify their existence. This may have been to push the reign of Emperor-Conqueror Jimmu into the distant past, strengthening the Yamato dynasty's claim to the Imperial throne. The earliest emperor whose life is detailed in the chronicles is 10th in the traditional succession, Emperor Suijin. The inhumanly tall Keiko, Japan's 12th emperor, had over 80 children with his wives and consorts, before dying at the improbable age of 143. Empress Jingu, wife and chief consort of the 14th Emperor Chuai, was famous for her faith and conquest of Korea. Following the murder of husband, she ruled as regent, seeking vengeance before then returning her attention to her promised land. She sailed across the sea with her armies and gave birth to her son only after they had conquered the peninsula. This son, Ojin, is the last of the so-called legendary emperors. From his 11 wives, Ojin had countless children. These children have children, and for the ensuing centuries, the Chrysanthemum throne passed from father to son, to wife, to grandson, to brother, to nephew, to son. Over half a millennium on, from the mythical rule of Jimmu Tenno, in the 3rd century AD, the Yamato clan were gaining more and more power and influence. At the time, Japan was made up of many small states. The powerful Yamato clan, led by chieftains and the future Emperor Kinmei, conquered lands to the south and unified Japan under Yamato power. This is the beginning of the Kofun period. Buddhists from China traveled to the Japanese archipelago, bringing with them a new writing system, making it a time of significant religious and philosophical change. Emperor Kinmei is also known for his support of Buddhism and for his efforts to promote the spread of the religion in Japan. He built several temples and monasteries and patronized Buddhist scholars and monks. During the Kofun period, Japan was divided into a strict social hierarchy, with the emperor and the nobility at the top, followed by the bushi, a warrior class who would later become the samurai class, the peasants, and the outcasts. Despite the strict social hierarchy, life during the Kofun period was relatively peaceful and stable. There were few wars or conflicts, and the cities, especially Nara, were bustling centers of commerce and culture, and the arts and literature flourished. In 710, Empress Genmei established her official residence in Nara, and the capital of the empire moved with her. Nestled deep in the Nara Mountains, the new capital, Heijō-kyo, was based on the cities of the Chinese Tang dynasty. The Nara period saw the first signs of a tangible culture, and it was during this time that the first historical records were kept. Heijō-kyo flourished as Japan's first international and political capital and became a bustling hub for international merchants and traders, bringing with them news, goods, and foreign cultures from along the Silk Road. In 794, Kanmu, the 50th emperor of Japan, moved the capital to Heian-kyo, modern-day Kyoto, where the imperial capital will remain for 1,000 years until the Edo period begins in the 17th century. Although the Imperial House of Japan ostensibly held power, the real power was in the hands of the Fujiwara clan, a powerful family of nobles who had intermarried with the imperial family, lessening the power of the emperor himself. The Heian-era court was a lavish and opulent place to be. It was the center of power in Japan. The imperial court received cultural delegations from China and was further strengthened by the conquest of the north of the mainland, Honshu. This was the zenith for artistic and cultural development of the Japanese imperial court, and saw the evolution of more unique Japanese culture. Phonetic alphabets, hiragana and katakana, were created by scholars, creating a cursive alphabet with a unique writing method distinctive to Japan. Both alphabets are still used today. The Heian period is also considered the peak of the Japanese imperial court and noted for its art, especially poetry and literature. written by the noble woman Murasaki Shikibu in the early 11th century. The Tale of Genji is a classic work of Japanese literature. The work tells the story of Prince Genji, the son of an imperial prince, and his various romantic and political endeavors. Notable for its depiction of Heian-era court, customs, and culture, and its exploration of the role of women in society, it is not only considered a beloved classic of Japanese literature, but also an important historical and cultural document. The courtiers at the imperial palace lived a life of great luxury and refinement, surrounded by the beauty and splendor of the Heian era. They were masters of the arts and the pleasures of the senses, and they spent their days in leisurely pursuits, enjoying music, poetry, and the company of beautiful women. But despite the outward appearance of happiness and contentment, the courtiers were often troubled by feelings of loneliness and isolation. The rigid social hierarchy of the Heian era dictated that they must always observe the strict protocols of behavior and decorum, and they were forbidden from expressing their true feelings and emotions. The prince too was affected by these constraints, and he often found himself longing for a deeper, more meaningful connection with the people and the world around him. He sought solace in the beauty and the tranquility of nature, and he found great joy in the simple pleasures of life, such as watching the changing of the seasons and listening to the sounds of the birds. And so lived his life, seeking to find meaning and fulfillment in a world that often seemed cold and cruel. He knew that he could never fully escape the strictures of society, but he found solace in the small moments of beauty and joy that he encountered along the way. Consumed by the debauchery of their courtly exploits, the Heian emperors were more interested in maintaining their life of luxury and refinement than they were in day-to-day governance. To rid themselves of whatever guilt or responsibility they may be avoiding, the imperial court delegated their duties to the kampaku, powerful imperial courtiers who effectively ran the country on behalf of the emperor. While the imperial court was preoccupied within itself, the emperor's power gradually declined and eventually he disbanded the imperial armies. Unbeknownst to the imperial court, in the outer provinces, a revolution was stirring. During the Heian period, The military was made up of a variety of different groups, including the Imperial Guard, the Palace Guard, and the provincial armies. These military forces were responsible for protecting the country from invasions and maintaining order in times of peace. It was during this time that a new class of warriors emerged, known as the Bushi, or warriors. The Bushi had been drawn from the ranks of the nobility and were trained in the use of weapons and martial arts, and were expected to adhere to a strict code of conduct known as Bushido, which emphasized loyalty, honor, and self-discipline. They would become known as the samurai. Away from the capital, the nascent samurai offered a new ruling class, a militarized alternative aristocracy to the detached and self-serving imperial house. With the influence of the imperial court dwindling, these militarized samurai clans began competing for power. While the emperor was still technically in power, powerful clans around Kyoto secured high-ranking positions as ministers, amassing wealth by raising taxes and through protective agreements and political marriages. The samurai accumulated political power, eventually surpassing the traditional aristocracy. But these samurai were not united as one. In the early 11th century, there was a clash of clans. Both clans were noble samurai families with a long history of rivalry. The Taira clan, who were based in the west of Japan, had gained a significant amount of power during the late Heian period, and had considerable control and sway over the imperial court. Meanwhile, the Minamoto clan, who were based further east, had been largely marginalized and sought to overthrow the Taira and seize the control of the government for themselves. In the 5 years that lapsed from 1180, a bloody war was fought between the Taira and the Minamoto. The two clans engaged in a series of bloody battles and skirmishes with samurai from each side warring to gain the upper hand for their side. Initially, the Taira clan seemed to be the dominant force. But any celebrations of victory were to be premature.
三寺の鐘は波に響きて、竜王の娘を呼んで海底の竜宮に住まわす。
The emperor during the Genpei War was Emperor Takakura, who was a member of the Taira clan and close ally of the Taira leader, Taira no Kiyomori. Emperor Takakura was a young and inexperienced ruler, and he was unable to effectively lead the Taira clan in the war against the Minamoto. The Minamoto clan, under the leadership of Minamoto no Yorimoto, was eventually able to turn the tide and emerge victorious. In the naval battle of Dan-no-ura, the Taira were decisively defeated, and the Minamoto emerged as the dominant power in Japan. The victorious Minamoto clan established their own militarized government under the power of shogun that was established in Kamakura. This spelled the end of the Gilded Age of Imperial Japan. The victory marked the end of the Genpei War and ushered with it the end of the Heian period and the beginning of the Kamakura period. The rise of the samurai class and the increasing power of the Kamakura shogunate led to a sharp decline in the influence of the imperial court and kuge. Despite their lack of political power under the shogunate, the emperor and the kuge continued to play a significant role in Japanese society and culture. The emperor was permitted to remain the symbolic head of states, and he was revered as a divine figure by the Japanese people. But the Chrysanthemum throne does not sit idly by. A little more than a century later, in 1333, Emperor Go-Daigo was planning to overthrow the Kamakura shogunate and reclaim power for the imperial family. Knowing that the emperor was rallying his vassals to resist Kamakura rule in the east, the shogunate sent Ashikaga Takauji, a high-ranking samurai general, to put down the rebellion. But when Ashikaga met with the forces, instead of defeating them as he had been ordered, he joined them. For reasons that are unclear, he marched with them back towards Kamakura and fought alongside the emperor. The turncoat samurai was a skilled warrior and talented strategist, and returned to Kamakura with the imperial army, where he overthrew the shogun, re-establishing the authority of the imperial court. The Ken restoration had been inspired by the Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven, which held the rulers who lost the support of the people and the gods would be overthrown. Go-Daigo and his supporters had believed that Kamakura shogunate had lost the mandate to rule, and thus they had sought to restore power to the imperial court and end the shogunate's rule. For 3 years, the emperor maintained his mandate of heaven, but by 1336, the divine mandate seems to be slipping from his grasp. Though Japan was once more under civilian imperial rule, Go-Daigo's limited support from samurai, still loyal to the Kamakura shogunate, imperial military inferiority, and his own weak leadership led to the continued rise in popularity of his former ally, Ashikaga Takauji. Emperor Go-Daigo's unpopularity and ultimate failure to reassert imperial rule allowed Takauji to establish his own military government in Kyoto 1336, effectively overthrowing the Kemmu restoration and appointing himself as the new shogun. After a 3-year-long interregnum known as the Kemmu restoration, the Ashikaga shogunate was inaugurated and exercised its domination over the northern imperial court. However, during the Kemmu restoration, the imperial court of Japan had split into two. After Ashikaga Takauji established himself as the shogun, a dispute arose with Emperor Go-Daigo on the subject of how to govern the country. That dispute led Takauji to cause Prince Yutahito, the second son of Emperor Go-Fushimi, to be installed as Emperor Komyo while Go-Daigo fled Kyoto. Henceforth, Japan was divided between two rival imperial courts. The northern court located in Kyoto in favor of Komyo under Ashikaga influence, and the southern court located in Yoshino in favor of Go-Daigo. This time became known as Nambokcho, the period of warring states. The ensuing wars and revolts ended 50 years later with the surrender of the southern court during the reign of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu in 1392, which resulted in the reunification of Japan under the Ashikaga shogunate. It is during this period that daimyo system is established. The Shugo daimyo were feudal landholders who were the military governors of the provinces and responsible for maintaining order and collecting taxes. They had not only military and police powers, but also economic power within their province. The Shugo and less influential Jito were members of the samurai class, and they had a great deal of power and influence within their territories. They were appointed by the shogun and were responsible for enforcing his authority within their provinces. In 1467, a few Shugo daimyo revolted and attempted to overthrow the shogun, and 150 years of civil war erupted. During the Kamakura period, the daimyo were given a great deal of autonomy and were allowed to rule their territories as they saw fit. However, as the shogunate weakened and the daimyo gained more and more power, they began to challenge the authority of the shogun and assert their own independence. As a result, Japan was divided into a number of small and independent states, each ruled by a powerful daimyo who had a cohort of loyal samurai. These daimyo were constantly at war with one another, as they sought to expand their territories and strengthen their positions of power. Known as Sengoku or Warring States period, which spanned the years between 1467 and 1573. The fierce battles and epic struggles that erupted as rival samurai clans clashed in the fight for power and supremacy led to widespread instability and conflict. Life in medieval Japan was a harsh and unforgiving experience for most people. The vast majority of the population was made up of peasants who lived in small villages and worked the land to survive. They lived in simple thatched roof houses and were at the mercy of elements, facing frequent natural disasters and struggling to make ends meet. They were also at the mercy of their landlords, paying taxes to the daimyo in exchange for protection. Life for the common people was generally hard, as they faced high taxes. For the samurai class, life was somewhat easier, as they enjoyed high social status and economic privilege. They lived in lavish castles and mansions and were supported by a network of vassals and retainers. However, even the samurai lived under a code of strict discipline and were expected to adhere to a strict set of rules and values. As the daimyo and their samurai warriors clashed on the battlefield, the country was plunged into a state of constant warfare. Towns and villages were burned to the ground, and the people lived in fear of the next attack. It was a time of great suffering and hardship, as the people struggled to survive in a world of constant conflict. But out of the bloody chaos and near constant turmoil of the Sengoku period, a new hero emerged, promising to bring an end to the wars and unite the country under one name. His name was Tokugawa Ieyasu. Through his cunning strategy and military prowess, the powerful daimyo defeated his rivals and managed to establish a centralized and authoritarian government that would rule Japan for almost 3 centuries of unprecedented peace and prosperity. Tokugawa Ieyasu wins the war in 1600 and restores shogunate supremacy. The installation of the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603 marked the beginning of the Edo period. For the first time in over a millennium, the capital was moved from Kyoto to Edo, modern-day Tokyo. The finally unified Japan isolates itself from the rest of the world. It will not be seen by foreigners for the next 250 years.
The Emperor in 1947 had made a formal appearance before the Diet to announce that the newly conceived Japanese Constitution had outlawed war for all time.
The Western world's 20th century after Christ Japan stood at the threshold of a new era. The cult of emperor worship was appropriated by a small but powerful militarist clique, which adopted the doctrine of extending Japan's borders by force if necessary.
ここに改めて国民の幸せを祈るとともに、我が国の一層の発展と世界の平和を願います。被災された方々が安心できる生活が一日も早く戻ることを心から願っています。